Hello, it's Sandy, and I want to introduce you to my favorite tree in my yard. Not that little tiny maple, but the big sycamore behind it. Such a gorgeous tree. It's been here far longer than I have, and I love it except for the burrs, the achenes that land in my yard. But it's still such a pretty tree, and I'm going to be drawing one of the leaves from it today. I'm going to show you some techniques for mixing colors that are going to look more natural and more realistic than some of the electric colors that come in some of the brands of art supplies that we use. This works on watercolors and all kinds of mediums, but I'll be using alcohol markers today. But watch it even if you use a different medium because the color theory is still the same. And I'm going to be creating this beautiful leaf and the achene that goes with it. In this video, I'm going to talk you through some of the greens that I used in creating that leaf drawing. And it's from this tree, but you might notice that that little clip I showed you is going to be much darker than the leaves that are out here on the tree. And that is because when trees are outside in the sunshine, they're significantly brighter. A lot of them are very transparent, so you're really getting that glow of the sunlight through the Platanus occidentalis, the American sycamore, as well as a lot of other trees around you. So if you grab a leaf and bring it into your studio to work on it, you're going to need different colors than if you're sketching it outside. So there's a big difference in that between the two because of the lighting. And of course, there's going to be lots of other factors as well. But in this particular video, I wanted to draw that leaf in kind of a realistic way. Originally, I was thinking of doing it twice the size, and then I realized that particular leaf was going to die before I got that finished. So I had to make it a smaller size so that it would not shrivel up and disappear on me before I finished shooting the video, because that one would have taken a couple of days. So let's get started on this lovely leaf and the achene, which is a little burr-like fruit that sprouts from this guy. It grows in the fall, and then all spring and summer, I have them all over my yard, and I have to go clean it up before I mow because all of those little things sticking out from it are going to make a little seedling. So there's all those hairs, and they're each individually a seed. So I drew the entire leaf, just basically traced the outside of the leaf, so you can do that with any leaf around you. This one is a big one, and I did pick a big one because I wanted to do kind of some juicy coloring and playing around with the greens. And so we're going to start with the petiole, which is the stem that goes from the leaf or the burr down to the branch or the limb, whatever it's hanging off of. And yes, I'm using science words because in my new Tremendous Sketches class, I learned so much about trees and leaves and all of their parts and everything. So yay for that. Now I saw some like really bright yellow greens in these, but as soon as I started coloring them right next to the ones that were the realistic ones, I realized these colors were too bright. That yellow was too sassy, too lemony. And I toned it down a little bit with a yellow-green color, but I needed to do something a little bit more to it because this was still just feeling cartoonish by comparison to the color that is right there in front of me. And with alcohol markers, which is what I'm using today, you're always going to end up getting brighter colors. That's what alcohol markers do. They're not made for realistic coloring. And especially brands other than the Copics. Copics has more colors that are, I guess, more neutral and can make more realism than a lot of other brands. So I'm going to show you some things that you can do to fix that. Now this is a YG61. It's a desaturated kind of green color. And that means I can go over this and start to basically dull down that yellow and the yellow-green and turn them into this almost like brownish green color, which is the color that I see in the stem. Down at the base of it, there's a brighter green as it starts to, make that little bit down there at the bottom. There's some browns in there, And I was just looking really closely at it to try to kind of get in there and draw some of those details. Now let's talk a little bit about glazing. We're going to glaze the blade of the sycamore. Blade is basically the word for the entire leaf itself, the leaf body. And I have this section done here. I'm going to show you a section of how I got to that point in just a minute. But it didn't look yellow-green enough, so I'm glazing it. And in watercolor, it's like a really simple, clean layer over top of whatever you've already painted. You do the same thing with pencil or anything else. This is glazing with alcohol markers. I'm just trying to not scrub back and forth. I'm trying to just do a coat of this more yellow-green color to push the color a little bit closer to what I'm trying to match. And you can do that with lots and lots of mediums. There's some that you can't do it at all with, but with alcohol markers, you can definitely do it. And I do it a ton with watercolor. And let me show you in a faster fashion how I got to that bottom section, because that took me quite a while to work out. So in this one, I started with a really pale yellow-green, went over it with something more bluish. And I'll put the colors here on the screen. Then I moved into something that's a little darker that has more of a blue tone to it, because the angle that I was looking at it, I could see shadows right around each of those veins in the leaf itself. Sometimes the veins look darker and sometimes they look lighter than the body of the actual leaf itself. So I started putting in more almost in a pattern, because there's something in this leaf where there's like these little dark places that move across each leaf section. I'm guessing it's some sort of internal types of motion of something going on with photosynthesis. I don't know what that is. And then I went back to that original like bluish greenish color to start again glazing over top of what's already there. And I went over top of the veins to start to darken them. Then I went in with a surprise color, a brown. That's going to dull things down a little bit. There'll be less on the electric side, which you get from a lot of markers. Or if your watercolors just feel too screamy bright sometimes, try mixing a little bit of brown, a little bit of gray or something in them to tone them down, or mix the complement in with it. So with greens, I often use browns. You see a lot of brown in nature beyond just, dirt and tree trunks. So then I started going in again, putting in more detail, layering over a more bluish color. This is a YG45, and just adding more blue to it, and then sitting and waiting sometimes in between layers to see what happens. Alcohol marker takes a couple seconds for that alcohol to dry out of the paper, so that sometimes you look back at something you just finished coloring and all of a sudden it looks very different than it did right when you put the ink down. So always wait and take a look at it, and then see if you need to go over anything and kind of tidy up a little bit. And I'm adding even just a little bit more, little tiny tidges of the brown color again. When glazing with watercolor, you need to just be as simple as possible and glaze over a perfectly dry paper when you do it. So let's color in the akene, which is the seed pod thing that I mentioned. These are quite the mess in my yard. It's the only thing I don't like about my sycamore. And I started with some brown, and then I'm going to be throwing greens and browns together in this because of the colors that I saw in it. And sorry, it's not on screen right now. It'll be back in just a moment. But around the outside edges of all of the little hairs that are on this, because when these things fall off the tree and they land in my yard, I've seen them, and they basically are a reverse dandelion puff. Those things kind of fly outward. These are little hairs that are all kind of tucked inward. And if you pick it up, it'll just kind of crumble on you, and you see all these little hairs, and they have brown on the ends of them. So trying to figure out how to render that was a challenge, especially when the color of the akene or the burr is kind of in the same value range as this leaf. It's very hard to tell them apart, and I wanted to make them look as much like what I saw in front of me. So I just kept layering greens together with the brown to see how that would work. And now I didn't know if this was going to work when I did it, so just put that out there. So now I've remembered to bring the Akeen back out here into the drawing so you can actually see what I'm doing. And I'm adding more greens into it, going right over top of those browns with it. Now I am getting to the point where I'm getting a little worried about whether or not I'm going to be too dark, because there is a little bit of a glow around the outside edges. And I was trying to think ahead to how I might handle that. Now I could just pour in a whole lot of colorless blender to try to lift that out. But instead, I'm just going to keep going with some of these darks to try to get the roundness of this thing. It's got some dark in the center and then a little bit on the, on both sides. My light on the right-hand side is slightly stronger on this. So, I was kind of playing around with what direction I was going to go with it. But I decided for the black portion, I would start using a pen, a multiliner pen, because I needed those spots to be very, very tiny. And if I ended up adding more color on top, I needed the black part to stay there. I didn't want the black part to wash out. And if I had used a black alcohol marker, it would bleed out and make a mess all over. So this way, at least it's going to stay in place. And, I created more shadows over on the left-hand side, exaggerated that a little bit because I just wanted the volume created by that, because the bird does look a little bit on the flat side in what you see here on screen. So I was trying to, get those details in there and realized I did need to bring a little bit of light back in. And the one way that I know to do that is with a white gel pen. This one is a Signo Uniball gel pen. And by itself, it always sticks out like a sore thumb to me on a drawing. But what I was planning on doing with it, I was hoping was going to work. I colored right over top of it. But you have to color over top of gel pen after it's dry. So don't do it while it's wet, or you're going to get the ink from the pen onto your marker. But you also need to use a darker color, because lighter colors are not really going to work all that well. And you're just going to end up with something that looks like having white dots all over the place. So that mostly worked. And when I pulled back from this and the whole drawing is done, I was much happier with it than right in that moment. So sometimes it takes us a little distance from our artwork to start seeing it as it is. One final addition to my drawing is a ladybug, Coccinellidae, according to some Italian guy on YouTube who pronounces scientific words for people like me who don't know how to say them. So Coccinellidae is what he says. Sorry about the footage being fuzzy on this. The camera was set up to focus on the top of the leaf, and I put my hand right there in the top of the leaf, so it's focusing on my hand and not on the bug. But I used a couple of reds to add some dimension and stuff to the ladybug. And don't worry, my hand will move in a second, and you'll get to see the ladybug start to appear. I added some spots to her with the black marker. And it was kind of nice when the ink was really wet on the paper. The spots kind of blended in a little bit, and they are a little bit on the blendy side when you're talking about a ladybug. So yes, in just a second, we will get to see. There we go. She's in focus now. I say she's a she. I should look up and see if, what it is that makes a ladybug a girl or a boy. But nonetheless, ladybug is done here. Adding a little bit of shading onto her head, so she has a brighter spot on her head and then a brighter spot on her back. I did see a ladybug on the leaf before I pulled it off of the tree. I should have filmed it when I did that. That would have been smart of me to prove that I did see a ladybug on this leaf. But alas, she went AWOL, and I had to go look up a picture of a ladybug because I didn't get my ladybug shot on my camera. So adding her little legs, and I did add some shading underneath of her prior to adding the ladybug to it. So she looks like she's walking across the leaf. And then the last thing I wanted to do was add some shading under the entire leaf, all the way around the edges. And that meant using a number 4 gray. And anywhere where I wanted the tips of the leaf to look like they were up in the air, they weren't flat on the surface of the table, I would make the shadow look like it was far away. And anywhere where I wanted it to look as though the object was touching the table and then lifting up, then I would make it touch the object. So you can see the base of the leaf and the base of the petiole are both hitting the ground, and then the other shadows are more distant. And also, shadows are darker right next to the object, so I used a lighter C1, I think it was, in order to make the shadows in between so that they would change in value. And then I just went around the shadows all over the leaf to soften a few edges so that it didn't look like it was all exactly the very same, I don't know, same amount of focus, same amount of sharpness to it. And then it was all done. So I don't know what you guys think of my crazy leaf or my ridiculous color combinations, but try adding some browns or some desaturated greens to your next project and let me know if it worked to give you more realistic colors. And if you're interested in learning more about greens and trees, I have a brand new class that just launched. It's called Tremendous Sketches, and it's full of 6 different varieties of trees. We'll do leaves, we'll do individual trees, and we'll do whole canopy scenes. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It's a level 3 class. Links in the doobly-doo, and if you scroll down on that page where you're linked to, then you'll see a video specifically about that class and all the things you'll learn. So don't forget to come back tomorrow. I have a big giveaway coming up. Don't want you to miss out on getting some markers in your hot little hands. I will see you then. Until then, go out and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.